The wind moves first, long before a name is given to the place, before borders, before maps, before any human being can point to a continent and call it home. The wind crosses a colder earth and carries with it the smell of ice, wet stone, animal hide, wood smoke, and distant rain. It passes over Mammoth Steppe, where grasslands stretch wider than kingdoms that do not yet exist. It slides along the edges of forests where great deer move through shadow, and over mountains where snow holds the light long after sunset. Somewhere below, near a cave mouth, a small fire burns against the night. Around it sit people who are human, unmistakably human, yet not all the same kind of human. Some have the bodies and faces that would later be called Homo sapiens. Others belong to human lines that will one day be known only through fragments of bone, a tooth, a jaw, a trace of DNA preserved in cold darkness. The Earth is not yet the world of one human species. It is crowded with relatives. This is the first strange truth to hold in mind for most of human existence. Being human did not mean being alone. It did not mean there was only one kind of mind-making tools, watching the weather, learning trails, tending fires, carrying memories, or staring into the dark with the same mixture of caution and wonder that still belongs to us. The loneliness of our species is recent. It is the ending of a much older story, not its beginning. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story ahead does not begin with a single ancestor marching neatly toward the present. It begins with a branching world, a tangled world, a world in which the human family tree looks less like a ladder and more like a river delta, splitting, crossing, drying, flooding, and leaving behind channels that can still be seen if the light is right. In that ancient world, no one knows they are living in prehistory. No Neanderthal thinks of himself as an extinct cousin. No Denisovan, standing somewhere in the cold interior of Asia, imagines that one day the proof of her people may survive in a finger bone so small it can almost disappear in the palm. No early Homo sapiens walking through Africa or the Near East knows that descendants will one day look backward and call this a turning point. They live inside weather, hunger, warmth, danger, kinship, memory, and habit. They follow animals. They gather plants. They know the shape of rivers and the moods of stone. They sleep in rhythms that may not match the modern clock, sometimes resting in groups, sometimes rising in the night, sometimes waking to tend a fire or listen to the dark. What survives in the record suggests that ancient human life is not a crude waiting room before civilization. It is a dense, alert, skillful existence shaped by landscape and time. The planet itself is changing around them. During the Ice Age, climate is not a stable background. It is an active force. Glaciers expand and retreat, seas fall and rise, deserts widen, then soften, forests shift like slow-moving armies. Coastlines move so far that places once walked by humans now lie underwater. Grasslands appear where trees once stood. Mountains become barriers, then corridors. The world does not simply host human evolution. It presses on it, rearranges it, tests it, and sometimes opens unexpected doors. A valley that feeds one generation may empty in another. A cold spell may separate groups for thousands of years. A warmer interval may bring them close again. In such a world, isolation can create difference, and contact can erase it, or at least blur its edges. Across this changing earth, Several human kinds occupy different regions and possibly different ways of life. Homo sapiens emerges in Africa, carrying a body and brain recognizably like our own, though not yet living in the world we later build. Neanderthals, broad, powerful, and deeply adapted to Western Eurasia, move through cold valleys, limestone shelters, and open plains. Denisovans, more mysterious, leave almost no face behind, but their DNA shows that they are real and that they matter. Far to the island world of Southeast Asia, small-bodied humans such as Homo floresiensis survive in landscapes shaped by isolation. On Luzon, another enigmatic form, Homo luzonensis, leaves traces that are difficult to place neatly in any familiar category. In older layers and fading lineages, there are other humans too, some known from skulls, some from jaws, some from tools, some from controversies that do not resolve easily. Scholars still debate how many should be called separate species, how many are regional populations, and how much difference is enough to draw a hard line. The number 9 is not a simple census taken on one Ice Age morning. It is a way of standing back and seeing that the human story was once plural. That plurality is the heart of the mystery. The ancient Earth is not empty except for us. It is inhabited by cousins, some close, some distant, some so poorly known that they seem to hover at the edge of evidence. They are not monsters, not failed experiments, not crude sketches of modern humanity. They are human relatives adapted to real worlds. Neanderthals survived for hundreds of thousands of years in climates that would challenge any people. Denisovans leave a genetic inheritance strong enough to help later populations live at high altitude. Floresiensis persists on an island where evolution has its own strange rules, where size and survival do not follow the expectations of mainland life. Even the most fragmentary groups remind us that evolution does not move toward a single planned result. It experiments because environments change, populations divide, and time is long. For a long while, these humans do not know they are part of a vanishing crowd. They simply live. A group shelters from hard weather beneath rock. Another crosses a dry plain under a sky heavy with migrating birds. Another moves along a river where flint lies exposed in gravel banks. Another climbs into thinner air, where breathing becomes work and the body must find ways to endure. They make choices by season, not by destiny. Some choices leave marks cut stone, ash, butchered bone, pigments, ornaments, hearths, footprints, scraps of shelter, and the buried chemistry of ancient bodies. Other choices vanish completely. The gestures, songs, warnings, jokes, griefs, lessons, and silent understandings of these people are mostly gone. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is not a weakness of the story, it is part of its atmosphere. To imagine this crowded human Earth properly, it helps to remove the modern habit of placing Homo sapiens at the center from the beginning. There is no throne waiting for us. There is no guarantee that one lineage will inherit the planet. At different times and in different places, other humans seem just as rooted in their worlds as our ancestors are in theirs. A Neanderthal group in Europe may know its valleys better than any newly arrived sapiens could. A Denisovan population somewhere in Asia may carry adaptations refined across immense stretches of time. Island humans may possess knowledge that makes perfect sense in their bounded worlds, even if their bones later puzzle scientists. Survival is local before it is global. It depends on the next winter, the next birth season, the next animal migration, the next safe crossing, the next stone edge struck well enough to cut. Yet the ending is unavoidable because we are living after it. Today there is only one surviving human species, This fact can feel ordinary only because we are used to it. Look at it from the Ice Age, and it becomes astonishing. Why did the others vanish? Did they die out in separate tragedies? Were they absorbed into larger populations of Homo sapiens through interbreeding? Did climate change shrink their worlds until they could no longer recover? Did small populations make them fragile, vulnerable to chance, illness, poor seasons, or simply the slow mathematics of too few people spread too thin? No single explanation fully accounts for this. The disappearance of other humans is not one event. It is a pattern made from many local endings, and some of those endings may not have been endings in the clean sense at all. A people can vanish as a separate population while leaving descendants, genes, and adaptations behind. This is why Denisovans matter so deeply to the larger story. They are not merely another ancient group added to a list. They are a warning that the ground under human history is still shifting. For a long time, scientists relied mainly on bones and tools, and the bones were often scarce. Then DNA began to speak from fragments that looked almost hopelessly small. Suddenly, a whole human population could be recognized not by a complete skeleton, not by a painted cave wall, not by a city or grave or monument, but by genetic signals hidden in a trace of ancient tissue. The discovery did not make the past simpler. It made it stranger and more alive. It suggested that some human worlds may have passed almost invisibly through the record, leaving behind only faint biological echoes in people living thousands of years later. So the story opens not with a clean family tree, but with a night landscape. Fires burn in different regions of the old world. Some are tended by people who look like us, some by people who are close cousins, some, perhaps, by humans whose names science has not yet recovered. Above them the same stars move. Around them animals pass in the dark. The ice breathes at the edges of the world. Rivers cut through valleys that will one day be buried, flooded, or forgotten. Human beings, in several forms, are awake beneath the same sky, and far in the future, one species will look back from its strange solitude and try to understand how the crowded human earth became silent. The cave that changes the story of humankind does not look, at first glance, like a place large enough to hold such a secret. Denisova Cave sits in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, in a landscape where forests, river valleys, limestone cliffs, and open steppe press close together. It is not a city ruin. It is not a pyramid, a palace, a buried temple, or a field of standing stones. It does not announce itself as one of the great turning points in history. It is a chamber in rock, overlooking a valley that ancient animals and ancient people moved through again and again, drawn by shelter, water, stone, and the pathways made by geography. Yet in this cave, in a place where cold helped preserve what warmer lands often destroy, scientists found evidence of a human population that almost no one had imagined in such detail before. Not from a skull, not from a complete skeleton, not from a carved monument. From fragments so small they might have been overlooked in another age of archaeology. The cave's power comes from its position. The Altai is not simply remote wilderness. In deep time it is a meeting zone. To the west lie routes into the colder worlds of Europe and Central Asia. To the east and south open vast Asian landscapes, mountain corridors, deserts, forests, and plateaus. During different climatic phases, this region can be a refuge, a passage, a borderland, or a trap. Animals move through it. Human groups do too. A cave in such a place can become a repeated shelter across thousands of years. not because anyone plans a long history for it, but because generation after generation rediscovers the same practical truth rock protects. Valleys guide movement, and fire burns better when wind can be held at the mouth of stone. Inside Denisova Cave, archaeologists find layer upon layer of occupation. Stone tools appear, animal bones appear, charcoal, ornaments, and worked materials emerge from sediment that has been disturbed, frozen, thawed, entered by animals, entered by people, and rearranged by time. The cave is not a perfectly sealed museum drawer. It is a living geological space, and that makes interpretation difficult. Scholars still debate the exact association of some objects and which human group made them, because a beautiful object in a layer does not automatically reveal the hands that shaped it. This is one of the quiet frustrations of prehistory. The most tempting clues often arrive without a signature. A tool may say that someone was clever, it may not say who that someone was. Then comes the small bone. In 2008, archaeologists working in the cave recover a tiny fragment from a finger, later identified as belonging to a young female human relative. It is not dramatic to the eye. It does not have the visual force of a skull staring out from a museum case. It does not provide a face. It does not provide height, posture, hair, expression, or clothing. In older frameworks, it might have seemed too little to change very much. But the age of ancient DNA has made the smallest remains strangely powerful. From this fragment, scientists are able to recover genetic material. And what that DNA reveals is startling. The mitochondrial DNA does not fit neatly with modern humans. It does not fit neatly with Neanderthals either. It points toward a distinct human lineage, close enough to belong in the human family, but different enough to demand a new place in the story. That moment matters because it changes what counts as evidence. Before this, unknown human groups were usually recognized through bones with distinctive shapes: a brow ridge, a jaw, a skull, teeth, limb proportions, tool traditions, and burial context helped build arguments. DNA did not replace those lines of evidence, but it opened a hidden door beside them. Suddenly a human population could be discovered from a scrap. The past was no longer limited to the bodies that preserved well enough to be visually recognized. Some human lineages may have left almost no visible fossil record at all, yet still survive in molecules. Denisovans become the first major human group identified in this way, not primarily by anatomy, but by genetics. That is why the cave becomes more than a site. It becomes a warning. The record of ancient humanity is far thinner than the reality it tries to describe. The name Denisovan comes from the cave, not from what these people called themselves. Their own name is gone. If they had one in the way we would understand, their languages are gone, their stories are gone. Their daily habits survive only as inferences around a few remains and archaeological traces. This is important to remember, because scientific names can create a false sense of completeness. Once a group has a label, it can sound as if the mystery has been solved. But the label is only a handle attached to a darkness. Denisovans are real, yet for a long time they are known from almost impossibly little physical material: a finger bone, teeth, later additional fragments, and genetic signals that spread far beyond the cave itself. The evidence remains incomplete, and the incompleteness is part of what makes them so fascinating. Denisova Cave also refuses to belong to one human story alone. Evidence shows that different human groups used the cave at different times. Neanderthals were there. Denisovans were there. Modern humans may have passed through or occupied nearby worlds as well. Even more striking, One fragment from the cave revealed a person with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, a direct sign that these human groups were not separated by absolute barriers. They met, at least sometimes. They had children. That discovery gives the cave an almost intimate significance. It is not just a place where separate human types can be compared from a distance. It is a place where the boundaries between them became personal, biological, and immediate. Yet this should not be imagined as a crowded gathering of different human species sitting together in one chamber, like characters placed for our convenience. Time is deep. Occupations may be separated by centuries, millennia, or more. A cave can hold many human histories without those people ever seeing one another. Still, Denisova preserves evidence of overlap in the broader sense, overlap of ranges, overlap of genetic histories, overlap of ecological worlds. The cave becomes a fixed point around which a much larger invisible map begins to form. The few bones inside it hint at movements and populations outside it, stretching across Asia in ways that only later become clear through living DNA and other fossil finds. There is another detail that gives Denisova Cave its strange atmosphere. Some artifacts from the site, including ornaments and worked materials, suggest symbolic or advanced behavior in the region, though assigning them confidently to Denisovans, Neanderthals, or modern humans is difficult. A polished stone bracelet from the cave has often attracted popular attention, sometimes far beyond what the evidence can safely support. It is a reminder of how easily mystery becomes exaggeration. The grounded version is already remarkable enough in and around this cave. Ancient humans returned repeatedly, made tools, processed animals, used fire, and perhaps created objects that carried meaning beyond survival. No unsupported fantasy is needed. The real uncertainty is deeper and more interesting than a simple sensational claim. The cold sediment of Denisova Cave also preserves absence. It tells us what we do not have. We do not have a Denisovan face from the site. We do not have a full body. We do not have a clear set of Denisovan tools that can be recognized everywhere like a calling card. We do not have stories painted plainly on a wall explaining who entered, who left, who slept near the fire, who watched the valley, who returned in spring. What survives is partial: a cave, layers, bones, teeth, DNA, and the patient work of researchers willing to treat fragments as meaningful without pretending they say everything. From that patience, a vanished population steps into view, not fully, never fully, but enough to disturb the old picture of human origins. The cave in the Altai becomes a keyhole through which the larger Ice Age world can be glimpsed, not a world of one rising species and a few fading shadows, but a world of encounters, separations, mixtures, and unknown neighbours. A small finger bone becomes larger than itself. It turns the cave into a threshold. On one side is the older idea that the human past can be reconstructed mostly from the shapes of bones we can see. On the other side is a stranger truth: some of the most important humans in our history may have survived almost invisibly, waiting in the dark until their DNA was finally heard. If Denisova Cave is a keyhole, the world beyond it is crowded with shadows. Some are sharp enough to have names that feel familiar now. Others are still blurred at the edges, known from one island, one jaw, one skull, or one stubborn argument between specialists. To speak of 9 kinds of humans is not to imagine a neat lineup, as if all 9 stood shoulder to shoulder on the same plane, waiting to be counted. Time does not arrange itself so politely. Some lineages overlap clearly. Some may have missed one another by distance, climate, or thousands of years. Some are accepted by most researchers as distinct species, while others remain debated because fossils do not always obey the categories placed upon them. But the deeper point remains firm: the late human world was not a single road leading to us. It was a branching landscape of human experiments, each shaped by place, inheritance, isolation, and chance. At the centre of the later story stands Homo sapiens, though not because the early world knows we will become central. Our species emerges in Africa, with fossils showing a mosaic of features that gradually come together into the anatomy of modern humans. The face becomes smaller, the skull becomes rounder, the chin appears, yet even here the story is not clean. Early Homo sapiens is not born in one sudden place as a finished form, then sent out like an army. What survives in the record suggests a wider African process, with populations connected and separated across changing environments. Wet corridors open through deserts, grasslands shift, lakes swell and shrink. Groups move, meet, divide, and carry traits across the continent. Before Homo sapiens ever walks into Eurasia in lasting numbers, our own origin is already braided. Beyond Africa, Neanderthals occupy much of Europe and Western Asia. They are not the dim, shambling caricatures of older imagination. They are strong-bodied humans with large brains, skilled hands, and an extraordinary ability to survive cold, unstable landscapes. Their bodies are compact, their chests broad, their bones marked by lives of effort. They make stone tools, control fire, hunt large animals, use shelters, and in some places leave evidence of symbolic behaviour. Scholars still debate the full range of Neanderthal culture, and the evidence varies from site to site. But the old idea of Neanderthals as merely primitive has collapsed. They are close relatives, close enough that their DNA still lives in many people today. Then there are Denisovans, the almost faceless relatives whose importance is out of all proportion to the number of bones found. From a cave in Siberia, from teeth and fragments, from DNA pulled out of cold time, they emerge as a sister group to Neanderthals. Yet unlike Neanderthals, whose bones give them a recognizable physical presence, Denisovans first appear as a genetic signal. That signal later stretches across Asia and into the ancestry of some modern populations far from the Altai Mountains. Their story immediately suggests range, movement, and diversity. A group known from a cave in Siberia somehow connects to people whose descendants live in parts of Oceania, East Asia, and highland regions. The map is larger than the bones. Farther south, on Flores in Indonesia, another human shadow becomes stranger still. Homo floresiensis is small-bodied, with a tiny brain by modern standards, yet associated with stone tools and survival in an island ecosystem filled with unusual animals. Flores is a place where evolution can bend expectations. Islands often reshape bodies. Large animals may become smaller, small animals may become larger. Isolation can preserve ancient traits or push populations in surprising directions. Homo floresiensis reminds us that intelligence and survival cannot be measured by brain size alone in any simple way. The evidence suggests a human relative adapted to a limited world. On Luzon in the Philippines, Homo luzonensis adds another puzzle. Known from fragmentary fossils, including teeth and foot and hand bones, this human relative does not fit easily into familiar categories. Some features seem primitive, others are unexpected. How did its ancestors arrive? What kind of human made that crossing, or reach that land during lower sea levels and different coastal geography? The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the odd mixture of traits. Homo luzonensis is a reminder that Southeast Asia was not a side note in human evolution. It was a world of islands, forests, coastlines, and hidden populations, where bones preserve poorly and the sea has swallowed many ancient landscapes. In Africa, Homo naledi complicates the picture from another direction. Found in deep cave chambers in South Africa, this species combines a small brain with a body that is both primitive and surprisingly human-like in different ways. Its age means that a small-brained human relative may have existed while Homo sapiens was already present somewhere on the continent. The interpretation of its behavior remains debated, especially around how the bodies came to rest in difficult cave spaces. What can be said with confidence is still extraordinary. The human family tree kept side branches alive deep into periods once imagined to belong mostly to us. Older and more widespread stands Homo erectus. This lineage survives for an immense span of time, far longer than Homo sapiens has existed so far. Homo erectus walks with a body plan more like ours than earlier ancestors, spreads beyond Africa, makes tools, and endures through changing climates across parts of Africa and Eurasia. By the time later humans emerge, late surviving descendants or related forms may still exist in some regions, depending on how fossils are dated and classified. Homo erectus is the long-burning fire in the human story, the reminder that success is not measured only by who remains at the very end. Other names hover near the edges: Homo heidelbergensis, often used for Middle Pleistocene humans close to the ancestry of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens, Homo antecessor, known from Europe and debated in its relationships. Perhaps late archaic populations in China whose fossils are difficult to place. The exact count shifts depending on how researchers define species. A splitter sees distinct forms where a lumper sees regional variation. A new date can move a fossil into a different historical neighborhood. A new DNA result can redraw a branch that once seemed secure. This uncertainty is not failure. It is what happens when a living, changing population history is reconstructed from scattered bones and molecules that only rarely survive. So the 9 human shadows are not a tidy museum display. They are a moving crowd seen through fog: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, floresiensis, luzonensis, naledi, erectus, heidelbergensis-like populations, and other archaic humans known from fragmentary remains create a world in which humanity is plural, regional, and unfinished. Some of these groups may never have met. Others certainly did, at least through their descendants. Some left DNA in us. Some left only bones. Some left tools without bodies, or bodies without a clear culture attached. Together they changed the emotional shape of prehistory. The ancient Earth was not waiting for one chosen species. It was inhabited by many human answers to the same difficult question: how to live, for one more season, under a changing sky. And beneath that sky, the differences would not always have been visible in the ways modern people imagine. From a distance, a fire is a fire. A group moving across a valley is a group moving across a valley. A stone blade cuts whether the hand that made it belongs to a sapiens, a Neanderthal, or some other cousin whose name has not survived. To later science, they become categories. To the living world, they were presences neighbouring humans, unfamiliar humans, perhaps sometimes kin. Their stories overlap just enough to leave us with a haunting fact. We are the last voice of a once crowded room, and we are still learning who else was speaking. A face is usually what the mind wants first. Give an ancient human a brow, a nose, a jaw, a pair of eyes set beneath a ridge of bone, and suddenly the distance between then and now feels smaller. Neanderthals have been given faces many times. Some are rough and heavy in old reconstructions, shaped by the prejudices of earlier science. Others are more careful, more human, with skin, hair, expression, and the quiet watchfulness of people who knew how to survive difficult worlds. Homo floresiensis has a skull to puzzle over. Homo erectus has crania, jaws, limb bones, a body plan that can be imagined standing upright under the sun. But Denisovans resist the face. They enter history not as a skull looking back at us, but as information, a tooth, a finger fragment, a jaw from a high plateau. A few pieces that seem almost too modest for the burden placed upon them. They are among the most important ancient humans ever discovered. Yet for a long time they remain almost invisible. This invisibility changes the mood of the story. With Neanderthals, even if much remains debated, the bones give a body. With Denisovans, the body must be approached sideways. Scientists know they are close relatives of Neanderthals. They know Denisovans separated from the lineage leading to Neanderthals after both had diverged from the ancestors of modern humans. They know Denisovans interbred with Neanderthals and with Homo sapiens. They know some present-day people carry Denisovan ancestry. They know at least some Denisovan-related populations lived in cold northern Asia, and others or their descendants were connected genetically to much warmer and more distant regions. But what did a Denisovan look like when standing at a cave mouth in morning light? That remains one of the most haunting unanswered questions in human origins. The teeth offer one of the first physical hints. Denisovan molars from Denisova Cave are large, unusually large compared with many modern human teeth, and they do not simply match Neanderthal patterns. Teeth are small objects, but in paleoanthropology they can speak with surprising force. Their shape, roots, enamel, wear. An internal structure can preserve signals of ancestry and diet. A molar can become a map of development. It can tell scientists that the person who carried it belonged to a population with traits outside the expected range. Yet a tooth is still not a face. It does not reveal whether the cheeks were broad, whether the nose projected strongly, whether the forehead was low, whether the body was stocky, tall, compact, or variable across regions. It gives a clue, not a portrait. Then comes the jaw from the Tibetan plateau, found not in Siberia but high in a landscape of thin air and hard light. The Zyahi mandible, as it is known, is a powerful piece of evidence because it suggests Denisovan or Denisovan-related humans lived at high altitude long before modern populations fully occupied those environments. The jaw is robust. It has large teeth. It lacks a chin like that of modern Homo sapiens. Protein evidence helped link it to Denisovans, showing again that not only DNA but other molecular traces can illuminate the past. This is a lesser known but crucial point. Ancient DNA does not always survive, especially outside cold regions, but ancient proteins can sometimes last longer and help identify fossils that would otherwise remain mysterious. In this way, Denisovans begin to gain bone, not enough for certainty, but enough to step slightly closer to visibility. Still, the evidence remains incomplete. A jaw tells us more than a tooth, but it does not give the whole head. A finger bone gives DNA but not posture. A molar gives ancestry but not expression. Even the attempt to reconstruct Denisovan anatomy through genetics is filled with caution. Some studies have tried to infer skeletal traits from patterns of DNA regulation, suggesting possible features such as a wider skull or dental arch. But these reconstructions are not the same as finding a skeleton. They are models built on comparisons, probabilities, and assumptions. They can be intriguing, but they must be held lightly. In deep prehistory, confidence should rise only as far as the evidence allows. Scholars still debate how representative each Denisovan fossil is, because Denisovans may not have been one uniform-looking people spread neatly across Asia. They may have included deeply separated populations, perhaps as different from one another as regional archaic humans often were. That possibility matters. When we say Denisovan, the word sounds singular, like one people with one body type and one way of life. But the genetic evidence hints at diversity. Denisovan ancestry in some present-day populations does not appear to come from only one simple source. There may have been several Denisovan-related groups spread across Asia, separated by distance and time, each adapted to different environments. A Denisovan population in the Altai Mountains may not have looked exactly like one living nearer the Tibetan plateau, or farther south towards subtropical forests and island chains. Their differences may have been shaped by climate, diet, isolation, and contact with other humans. No single explanation fully accounts for all the genetic traces. The name may cover a wide human world that the bones have barely begun to reveal. To imagine their bodies, one must begin with what their environments demanded. In the Altai, winters could be severe, landscapes shifting between forest, steppe, and cold open ground. A human population living there would need to move efficiently, endure low temperatures, process animal resources, make and maintain tools, manage fire, and read the landscape with precision. In higher regions, thin air becomes another pressure. At altitude, every breath carries less oxygen. Modern Tibetan populations possess a version of the EPAS1 gene associated with adaptation to high altitude, and this genetic variant appears to have come from Denisovan-related ancestry. This does not tell us the exact shape of a Denisovan chest or lungs, but it does show that their bodies, or at least some Denisovan-related bodies, carried biological solutions to environmental stress that later became part of modern human survival. A vanished population helped living people breathe on the roof of the world. There is something quietly profound in that. The Denisovan body is mostly missing, yet one of its adaptations can still be felt in the blood of people living today. A jaw survives in a cave sanctuary on a plateau. DNA survives in modern genomes. A tooth survives in Siberian sediment. These are scattered pieces of identity, but they are not meaningless. They suggest a kind of humanity both familiar and strange, close enough to mix with us, different enough to be recognized as another lineage, widely dispersed enough to alter the genetic history of Asia and Oceania, and elusive enough that their appearance remains one of the great unfinished sketches of paleoanthropology. The uncertainty also protects them from becoming too easily simplified. Ancient human relatives are often flattened into symbols. Neanderthals become the strong, cold-adapted cousin. Homo floresiensis becomes the small island survivor. Homo erectus becomes the long-ranging walker. Denisovans are often described as mysterious because mystery is the most obvious feature left to us. But they were not mysterious to themselves. Their bodies were not puzzles. Their faces were not missing. They looked at one another fully. They knew kin by gait, scent, gesture, voice, and habit. They recognized age, mood, skill, fatigue, attention. They did not live as fragments. Fragmentation is what time has done to them. The same is true of identity. Modern science gives them a category, but ancient identity would have been lived at the scale of small groups. A Denisovan did not wake thinking of belonging to a species label. A person belonged to a band, a family network, a place remembered through movement, a set of trails, shelters, dangers, and seasonal returns. The boundary between us and others may have existed, as it does in many human societies, but it would not have followed Latin names. When Denisovans met Neanderthals or Homo sapiens, difference may have been recognized through bodies, tools, speech, smell, ornaments, gestures, or simply unfamiliar behavior. Yet the genetic record shows that difference did not always prevent intimacy. The human family tree is full of crossings, and Denisovans stand near the center of that tangled evidence. In the end, the Denisovan face remains unfinished, but not empty. It is built from a Siberian cave, from oversized molars, from a plateau jaw, from proteins, genomes, inherited altitude adaptations, and the knowledge that Asia once held human diversity still poorly mapped. It is a face seen through frost on glass. The outline is there, the presence undeniable, the details shifting whenever new evidence appears. And perhaps that is the most honest way to see them for now. Not as a complete portrait, but as a human absence with weight. A vanished people stands behind the evidence, close enough to touch our ancestry, distant enough to keep their features hidden in the dark. The closer Denisovans come into view, the more they pull Neanderthals with them. They are not isolated mysteries placed in separate display cases. They are sister lines, divided from a shared ancestral population and then carried into different regions of Eurasia by time, climate, and movement. Somewhere deep in the Middle Pleistocene, after the ancestors of these archaic humans had already separated from the ancestors of Homo sapiens, another split occurs. One branch becomes the Neanderthals of Western Eurasia, rooted especially in Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia. Another becomes the Denisovans, whose known traces point eastward and southward, across a map that remains only partly visible. The separation is real, but it is not clean in the way a diagram makes it seem. Human groups do not branch like ink lines on paper. They separate, meet again, exchange genes, drift apart, and leave behind histories that look tangled because they were tangled. Neanderthals give the Denisovan story weight by contrast. They are physically present in the fossil record in a way Denisovans are not. Their heavy brow ridges, large noses, strong limbs, broad trunks, and cold-adapted bodies have been studied for generations. Their sites stretch across Europe and into Western Asia. Denisovans, by comparison, seem spectral, yet genetics places them close to Neanderthals, close enough that the two groups are more like siblings than distant cousins. One sibling left a room full of bones, the other left a few objects and a message hidden in the walls. The relationship between them becomes clearest in the DNA. Neanderthals and Denisovans share ancestry after their line has already split from modern humans. Later, Neanderthals and Denisovans themselves separate from each other, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years before their final traces disappear. But even after separation, the door between them never closes completely. Mountain chains, forests, deserts, and glaciers create barriers, yet climate keeps changing those barriers. A cold step can open a route where forest once blocked movement. A warmer period can bring animals and humans into new contact zones. Populations that have lived apart long enough to become distinct can still meet at the edges of their ranges. Denisova Cave proves this with startling directness. One bone fragment from the cave, known to scientists as Denisova 11, belonged to a person whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. It is difficult to overstate how intimate that evidence is. Many forms of interbreeding can be inferred from ancestry scattered across genomes thousands of years later. But here the record is immediate. This is not a distant statistical shadow. It is a first-generation child of two different archaic human groups. The finding does not mean such unions were common everywhere, and it does not turn the Ice Age into a simple story of harmony or constant mixing. The evidence remains incomplete, but it shows that when Neanderthals and Denisovans met, they were biologically close enough to have children, and socially close enough, at least in that moment, for contact to become family. That single individual changes the emotional meaning of the human family tree. Species can sound like hard walls. In textbooks, names divide Homo sapiens here, Homo neanderthalensis there, Denisovans somewhere else. But ancient DNA keeps showing that the walls had doorways. Modern humans interbred with Neanderthals. Modern humans interbred with Denisovans. Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred with each other. There are even hints of ancestry from still older or unknown archaic populations entering Denisovan genomes. No single explanation fully accounts for all of these signals, but the direction is unmistakable. Human evolution is braided as well as branching. This braiding does not mean all ancient humans were the same. The differences mattered. Neanderthals and Denisovans had been separated long enough for their DNA bodies and perhaps behaviours to diverge. They may have occupied different ecological zones for long stretches. Neanderthals seem especially associated with Western Eurasian cold and temperate landscapes, while Denisovans appear to have ranged more widely through parts of Asia. Their meeting points may have been rare, limited, and shaped by shifting climate. A small population moving through a valley may encounter another only once in many generations. Yet for evolution, even rare contact can matter if descendants survive. The Altai Mountains may have been one such meeting zone. It is possible to imagine Neanderthal groups moving eastward during certain periods, following herds, river valleys, and habitable corridors. Denisovan groups, established or passing through, may have used the same cave landscapes. The cave does not tell us whether the encounter was peaceful, tense, brief, or ordinary. It gives no voices, no gestures, no memory. What survives in the record suggests contact, but not the full human texture of that contact. Science can identify parentage from molecules. It cannot reconstruct a night when two different human groups shared space or simply crossed paths at the edge of survival. There is a lesser-known complexity here as well. The Neanderthals connected to Denisova Cave were not always genetically identical to Neanderthals in Western Europe. Ancient DNA shows population structure among Neanderthals themselves, with groups replacing or mixing with other Neanderthal groups over long spans of time. Denisovans likely did too. So when one says Neanderthal and Denisovan, each word may conceal many local histories. A Neanderthal in the Altai is not just a copy of a Neanderthal in France. A Denisovan near Tibet may not be the same as a Denisovan in Siberia. For Homo sapiens, entering this Eurasian world means entering a landscape already inhabited by close relatives. Our ancestors do not walk into emptiness. In some regions, Neanderthals have been present for immense spans of time. In others, Denisovan-related populations may hold knowledge of mountains, forests, coasts, or high plateaus. Encounters with them leave traces in living people. Most non-African populations today carry some Neanderthal ancestry, usually a small percentage, inherited from ancient mixing after modern humans expanded out of Africa. Some populations in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan ancestry as well. The meaning of that inheritance is complex. Some archaic DNA may have been harmful and gradually removed by natural selection. Some may have been neutral, drifting through generations because it carried little cost. Some may have been useful where Neanderthals or Denisovans had already been adapting for hundreds of thousands of years. Genes connected to immunity, skin, metabolism, and altitude adaptation have all been studied in this context. though scholars still debate the exact effects of many variants. Interbreeding did not simply give modern humans a magic survival kit. It gave later populations genetic variation, and in certain places, some of that variation mattered. This is where the Neanderthal connection deepens the Denisovan mystery rather than solving it. Neanderthals show how visible an extinct human group can become when bones are abundant. Denisovans show how much can remain hidden, even when their genetic impact is profound. Together, they reveal a Eurasia filled not with separate evolutionary cages, but with zones of meeting and distance. Their story also softens the boundary around our own species. Homo sapiens survives, but not as a pure replacement untouched by others. We carry traces of vanished humans because our ancestors met them not only as competitors or strangers, but sometimes as mates and kin. So the family tree becomes a family thicket. Branches split, branches touch, some end above ground, some continue below it through roots we did not know were connected. Neanderthals and Denisovans stand close together in that thicket, one more visible, one more hidden, both essential. And somewhere in the cold chambers of Denisova Cave, a bone fragment preserves the simplest and most startling truth of all. The lost human world was not divided by lines as clean as our names for it. It was alive, moving, meeting, and mixing one generation at a time. At the mouth of Denisova Cave, life is not still. Even when the valley seems quiet, everything is moving. Wind moves through the trees and over the open ground. Herd animals move along routes older than memory. Snowmelt runs down from the mountains and feeds streams that cut through gravel and stone. Smoke moves upward from a hearth and curls against the cave ceiling, leaving behind the faint chemical signature of fire. People move too, not randomly, not as wandering figures lost in a brutal wilderness, but with knowledge shaped by repetition. They know where the river bends. They know where stone can be struck into sharp edges. They know where animals pass in certain seasons, where shelter catches the least wind, where dry fuel may still be found after rain, and where the valley becomes dangerous when weather turns. Their world is not empty nature. It is a lived-in map. To imagine Denisovan daily life, one must resist filling the gaps too quickly. The evidence remains incomplete, and Denisovans do not leave behind a clear manual of behaviour. At Denisova Cave, archaeologists find tools, animal bones, traces of occupation, and layers that show repeated use by different human groups across enormous spans of time. But assigning every object to Denisovans rather than Neanderthals or modern humans is difficult. The cave was shared by time before it was shared by science. Layers can blur, objects can move, later visitors can disturb older traces. The record is rich, but not simple. Still, what survives in the record suggests that whoever lived around this cave understood the landscape with precision, because survival in the Altai was not possible by strength alone. The Altai world can be generous, but only to those who know its rules. In warmer seasons, plants return, animals spread across valleys, rivers open, and movement becomes easier. In colder periods, the same land hardens, snow covers food, wind strips heat from skin, herds shift. A shelter that was merely useful in autumn becomes essential in winter. Denisovan groups, like other Ice Age humans, would have lived by reading change. They may have returned to places such as Denisova Cave when conditions made the shelter valuable, then moved outward when food, stone, or social ties pulled them elsewhere. The cave is not necessarily a permanent home in the modern sense. It may be a station in a wider pattern, a recurring point in a seasonal geography. Around the cave, daily life likely begins with practical attention. Fire must be maintained or remade, stone tools must be repaired, replaced or sharpened, animal hides, if used, must be cleaned, scraped, dried, and softened. Meat must be cut. Bones may be cracked for marrow. Plant foods, when available, must be gathered with knowledge of what is edible, useful, or dangerous. Water must be carried or reached. The body must stay warm. The group must decide whether to remain, travel, hunt, gather, wait, or split tasks among capable adults. None of this is primitive in the dismissive sense. It is a constant stream of decisions, made without writing, metal, agriculture, or domesticated animals, yet requiring memory, coordination, skill, and attention. One surprising detail about ancient human life is that sleep itself may have been more flexible than modern people assume. Studies of living traditional societies and historical patterns suggest that human sleep has not always followed one uninterrupted block in a sealed room. Ancient groups may have rested in ways shaped by firelight, temperature, social safety, animal movement, and the need to wake during the night. Around a cave mouth, sleep would not be an escape from the environment. It would be part of managing it. Some people may rest while others wake, tend embers, listen, or adjust coverings against the cold. This does not require imagining constant terror. It suggests a calmer, older rhythm, in which night is not empty time but a quieter extension of group life. The fire glows low, bodies rest near warmth, and the dark outside remains present without fully entering. Tools anchor this life in matter. Stone edges are the most durable survivors of ancient decision-making. A tool is both object and action. It preserves the choice of stone, the angle of a blow, the intended edge, the hand's experience. In and around Denisova Cave, stone technologies changed across time, reflecting different occupations and possibly different human groups. For Denisovans specifically, scholars still debate which tools can be confidently attributed to them. This uncertainty matters because culture cannot be read from stone alone without context. A flake may be practical, a blade efficient, a point carefully prepared, but the hand behind it is often anonymous. Yet the tools show that ancient humans here were not passive creatures reacting to nature. They reshaped materials to extend the body's power, cutting where teeth could not, piercing where fingers could not, scraping where nails would fail. Animal bones add another layer. The Altai supported a range of Ice Age fauna across different climatic phases. Horses, deer, bison, ibex, wild cattle, and predators that also knew the cave and valley worlds. Some animals were hunted, some may have been scavenged, some entered caves on their own. Cut marks, breakage patterns, burning, and context help archaeologists sort these possibilities, though no single sign tells the whole story. For the humans using Denisova Cave, animals were not simply food, they were movement on the landscape, seasonal information, danger, opportunity, raw material, and perhaps memory. A herd seen crossing a valley could shape the next day's decisions. A predator track near shelter could change how the group used the night. Fire would have been central, though again the details vary across sites and periods. Fire gives warmth, light, protection, cooked food, workable materials, and a focus for social life. It changes the cave itself, turning a cold chamber into an inhabited space. It lengthens the usable day. It creates a circle in which tools can be repaired and food shared after sunset. Fire also demands labour. It needs fuel. It needs knowledge of dry wood, dung, bark, or other burnable materials depending on environment, it must be guarded from wind and damp. To keep fire is to maintain a relationship with the landscape. Around Denisova Cave, smoke and ash become the thin remains of that relationship. What about language, stories, and social thought? Here the evidence grows quiet. Denisovans almost certainly communicated in complex ways, as all known later human groups did, and their close relationship with Neanderthals and modern humans suggests capacities far beyond simple calls. But the exact nature of Denisovan speech, symbolic life, and teaching remains unknown. No single explanation can turn a tooth or jaw into a language. Still, daily survival itself implies learning. Toolmaking must be learned, roots must be remembered, animal behavior must be taught through example, fire use must be maintained through shared practice. Even without preserved words, the pattern of life implies minds linked across generations. There may also have been beauty, though this is harder to prove. Objects from Denisova Cave, including ornaments, have attracted attention because they suggest that someone in the region valued more than immediate utility. But whether Denisovans made particular symbolic objects remains debated. A polished bracelet, beads, or worked materials can seem to pull the imagination toward a richly adorned Denisovan culture. Yet careful interpretation requires restraint. The safer truth is still powerful in this cave landscape. Ancient humans occupied a world of skill, material choice, repeated return, and perhaps symbolic behavior. The mystery is not whether they were capable of rich lives. The mystery is how little of those lives the Earth has allowed to remain. So life around the cave mouth is best imagined not as a frozen scene, but as a rhythm. Morning light touches the valley. Someone breaks stone with practiced force. Someone watches animals on a distant slope. Smoke clings to hair and hide. The cave offers shelter but not certainty. Beyond it, the Altai opens in all directions, beautiful, severe, and never fully safe. Denisovans live within that world as people adapted to it, not as shadows waiting to be discovered. Their days are made of small acts that rarely fossilize: carrying, cutting, warming, listening, choosing, remembering. And in those acts, the nearly faceless people of the DNA record become human again. Not because we can see them clearly, but because we can recognize the shape of a life organized around survival, skill, and the steady return of fire against the cold. Beyond the cave mouth, the map begins to widen. Denisova Cave gives the name, the cold sediment, the first genetic signal, and the intimate proof that these people existed, but it cannot contain them. A human population does not leave descendants across vast distances by remaining forever in one valley of the Altai Mountains. The moment Denisovan DNA appears in living people far from Siberia, the cave becomes less like a homeland and more like a surviving window, one rare place where preservation happened to favor discovery. The real Denisovan world, or the world of Denisovan-related populations, must have stretched across landscapes that archaeology has only begun to connect: high plateaus, forested mountains, river corridors, monsoon edges, tropical islands, and coastlines now drowned beneath rising seas. This is one of the strangest turns in the story. The first Denisovan remains come from a cold cave in southern Siberia, yet some of the strongest Denisovan ancestry in present-day people is found much farther south and east, especially in parts of island Southeast Asia and Oceania. That does not mean the same individuals from the Altai walked all the way to those islands in one simple migration. It suggests something more complex and more interesting. Denisovans were likely not a single small group huddled near one cave, but a wider family of related populations spread across Asia, some perhaps separated from one another for a very long time. The evidence remains incomplete, but the genetic trail refuses to stay local. To follow that trail, one must imagine Asia not as an empty background but as a continent of immense ecological variety. There are cold steppes where winter cuts deeply. There are deserts and basins that can isolate populations for millennia. There are mountain chains that divide worlds while also creating passes for those who know them. There are great river systems that guide animals and humans across enormous distances. There are tropical forests where bone dissolves quickly and the archaeological record becomes frustratingly thin. There are coastlines that once lay far beyond the modern shore, when sea levels were lower during glacial periods, exposing broad plains now hidden underwater. If Denisovan-related groups lived across parts of this world, many of their camps, tools, and remains may now be lost, buried, eroded, or submerged. The Tibetan Plateau offers one of the strongest signs that Denisovans were not confined to the Siberian north. The Siahe jaw, found in a cave on the plateau, links Denisovan-related humans to high-altitude Asia. This is not a small detail. The Tibetan Plateau is often called the roof of the world for a reason. Its air is thin, its winters harsh, and its landscapes demanding even for modern humans with inherited adaptations. A human relative living there long before the rise of settled civilization would have needed biological endurance and deep environmental knowledge. The Denisovan connection to this region suggests that some archaic humans were able to occupy places once assumed to be too difficult for early populations. It also gives new meaning to the altitude-related genetic legacy found in many Tibetans today. A vanished human line may have helped later Homo sapiens survive where breathing itself becomes a challenge. Farther east, fossils from China have long complicated the picture of human evolution. Some remains do not fit easily into familiar categories. A skull or jaw may look archaic in one feature and more modern in another. For decades, these fossils were difficult to place because there was no clear genetic anchor. Some may represent late archaic humans, some may be related to Denisovans, some may belong to populations still unnamed or debated. Scholars still debate these connections, and caution is necessary. It is tempting to label every mysterious Asian fossil Denisovan, but resemblance, geography, and possibility are not proof. Still, the existence of Denisovans makes the old uncertainty more meaningful. It shows that Asia did contain hidden human diversity, and that some puzzling fossils may one day find new identities through DNA, proteins, or better comparisons. Southward, the trail becomes even more elusive. Warm and humid environments are cruel to ancient DNA. Bone breaks down, organic material decays. Caves may preserve some evidence, but far less reliably than cold northern sites. This means that Denisovan-related populations could have lived in parts of southern China, mainland Southeast Asia, or beyond without leaving the kind of genetic evidence that survives in Siberia. The absence of bones is not the same as proof of absence. It may simply mean that the environment has been erasing the record faster than science can recover it. What survives in the record suggests presence indirectly, through the genomes of living people and through the puzzle of how Denisovan ancestry reached regions so far from the Altai. The island world deepens the mystery. Populations in places such as Papua New Guinea and parts of Oceania carry significant Denisovan ancestry compared with most other modern groups. This raises difficult questions. Where did the interbreeding happen? Was it on the Asian mainland before the ancestors of these populations moved farther south and east? Was it somewhere in Ireland, Southeast Asia, in a now vanished coastal world exposed by lower Ice Age seas? Were there multiple encounters with different Denisovan-related groups? No single explanation fully accounts for every genetic pattern, and researchers continue to refine the models. But the implication is powerful: Denisovan-related humans, or at least their genetic influence, reached deeply into the human story of the southern arc of Asia. Lower sea levels during glacial periods would have transformed the geography of Southeast Asia. Islands now separated by water were often connected into larger landmasses, while other crossings still required movement over sea channels. Ancient coastlines, beaches, river mouths, and campsites may now lie beneath water. The humans who moved through those landscapes did not see Indonesia or Papua or Southeast Asia as modern categories. They saw land, forest, river, coast, horizon, and passage. Some islands, like Flores and Luzon, had their own human lineages, showing that archaic humans were capable of reaching and surviving in island settings long before history. Denisovan ancestry in modern populations hints that another hidden human presence may have been part of this southern world as well. There is a lesser-known contradiction here that makes the story especially haunting. The best physical evidence for Denisovans comes from northern and high-altitude places, yet the strongest living genetic echoes appear in people with roots far to the south and east. The bones and the genes point in different directions, not because one is false, but because each preserves a different part of a much larger map. Bones survive where conditions allow. Genes survive where descendants remain. A cold cave can preserve a finger bone from one population. A living genome can preserve a trace from another population thousands of kilometers away. Together they imply a Denisovan world much wider than the visible fossil trail. This wider world also changes how we imagine encounters between human groups. Homo sapiens moving out of Africa and across Asia did not enter a single corridor occupied by one type of archaic human. They moved through a continent of old residents, some perhaps Neanderthal-related in the west and north, some Denisovan-related in the east, some belonging to island lineages, and some not yet named. Contact may have happened in pulses. A small sapiens group following a river valley might meet archaic humans whose ancestors had occupied the region for tens of thousands of years. Another group might pass through land where no other humans remained. A third might inherit Denisovan DNA from earlier mixing already carried by neighbouring populations. The spread of ancestry is not always the same as the movement of bodies. Genes can travel through networks long after the first encounter, and so Denisovans become less a single species in a single cave and more a hidden geography. They are in the Altai, but not only there. They are on the Tibetan Plateau, but probably not only there either. They appear in living genomes across Asia and Oceania, like stars seen through breaks in cloud. Each signal is small, but together they reveal that the late human world was larger, older, and more crowded than the bones alone suggest, somewhere beyond the Siberian cave. Denisovan-related people learned climates, crossed valleys, endured altitude, entered forests, perhaps approached coasts, and became part of the ancestry of humans who would never know their names. The map is still incomplete, but its outline is no longer empty. Asia was not a blank stage for Homo sapiens. It was already inhabited by deep human histories, and some of them are still written quietly inside living blood. High places change the body slowly, then all at once. A person who climbs from low valleys into thin mountain air feels it first as effort. Breathing grows more deliberate. The heart works harder. Sleep becomes lighter. Cold arrives even under a clear sun. Distances shrink and stretch strangely. because a slope that looks gentle can drain strength from the legs, on the Tibetan plateau, where the land rises into one of Earth's most demanding human environments. Survival is not simply a matter of courage or skill. It is biology meeting landscape. It is the body learning, over generations, how to live where oxygen is scarce and weather can turn ordinary movement into labour. And in this high, severe world, one of the most surprising traces of Denisovans still lingers. The connection comes through a gene region often discussed under the name EPAS1. In many Tibetan populations, a version of this genetic adaptation helps people live at high altitude without some of the harmful effects that can occur when the body responds to low oxygen by producing too many red blood cells. This adaptation did not appear from nowhere. Genetic studies suggest that this beneficial variant entered the ancestors of Tibetans through interbreeding with Denisovan-related humans. The idea is startling because it turns a vanished human group into part of a living physiological inheritance. Denisovans are not only bones in caves or fragments in ancient sediment. In a very real sense, some part of their ancient adaptation still helps human beings breathe in the high air. This does not mean the Denisovans of Denisova Cave themselves were all high-altitude specialists. The Altai Mountains are demanding, but they are not the Tibetan plateau. Nor does it mean that every Denisovan population lived in one kind of extreme environment. The evidence remains incomplete, and the word Denisovan probably covers a range of related populations spread across different parts of Asia. Some may have lived in cold northern valleys, some may have occupied highlands, some may have moved through forests or lower latitudes where their remains are less likely to survive. But the genetic legacy tied to altitude suggests that at least one Denisovan-related group had already spent enough time in thin-air environments for natural selection to shape useful traits. When Homo sapiens later entered or expanded into those regions, they did not have to invent every adaptation from the beginning. Evolution had already done some of the work in another human line. The Siahi mandible strengthens this possibility. Found on the Tibetan plateau, this robust jaw links Denisovan-related humans to a high-altitude setting long before the historic peoples of the region. It gives the genetic story a physical anchor, a jaw without a chin, with large teeth, found in a place of cold stone and thin air, suggests that archaic humans had reached and endured one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. This is a lesser-known revolution in how human expansion is understood. Earlier assumptions often imagined high plateaus as late frontiers, places modern humans could only master after advanced culture, specialized clothing, or later technologies. But archaic humans were already there. They were not waiting for civilization to make harsh landscapes possible. They were adapting with bodies, behavior, movement, and knowledge. To live in such places, biology alone would not be enough. High-altitude survival requires a web of practical habits. Shelter matters, fire matters, timing movement matters, knowing when storms gather over ridges matters, knowing which valleys hold animals, which slopes expose fuel, where water freezes, where caves or rock shelters can protect from wind. All of this becomes part of survival. Denisovan-related people on the plateau would have needed more than an inherited gene. They would have needed memory embedded in groups, passed from experienced adults to younger members in protective, ordinary ways. They would have needed to understand the land with a precision that leaves few fossils but shapes every day. Cold also presses on human life in less dramatic but constant ways. It affects what can be eaten, what can be carried, how long hands can work outside shelter, how fire is managed, how tools are made when fingers stiffen, how sleep is arranged, and how bodies conserve heat. A broad valley under winter light may look empty, but for people adapted to it, it is full of information. Tracks in snow reveal movement, wind patterns reveal exposure, animal behavior reveals approaching weather. The body itself becomes a measuring instrument. Pain in the lungs, numbness in the hands, fatigue in the legs, and the quality of sleep all inform decisions. In such conditions, ancient humans survive not by conquering nature, but by reading it continuously. This matters for the larger story of 9 kinds of humans, because it shows that different human relatives were not simply scattered versions of the same life. They were shaped by different ecological pressures. Neanderthals were deeply adapted to many cold and temperate environments of Western Eurasia. Homo floresiensis survived in an island world where bodies and ecosystems followed strange rules. Homo naledi, whatever its full story, reminds us that small-brained human relatives persisted in Africa alongside more modern forms. Denisovans add another dimension adaptation across immense Asian environments, including the possibility of high-altitude survival. The human family was not just diverse in bones, it was diverse in ways of enduring the planet. Yet adaptation has a double edge. The same specialization that makes a population strong in one setting may not protect it everywhere. A highland group may be well suited to thin air but small in number. A cold-adapted population may thrive during certain climatic phases and struggle when environments shift. A group spread thinly across harsh landscapes may survive for thousands of years, then become vulnerable to sudden change, competition, isolation, or simple demographic bad luck. Scholars still debate how much Denisovan disappearance was driven by climate, by absorption into Homo sapiens populations, by small population size, or by a combination of all these forces. No single explanation fully accounts for the fading of such a widespread but elusive lineage. The high-altitude gene also reveals something unsettling about survival. Extinction is not always total erasure. A population can vanish as a distinct people, while a piece of its biology continues, selected and preserved because it helps another population live. In that sense, the Denisovan inheritance is not a relic in the passive sense. It remains functional. It still participates in life. A person breathing more easily on a high plateau may carry, unknowingly, the outcome of ancient encounters between different human kinds. The past is not only behind us, sometimes it is inside the body, still doing work. There is a quiet grandeur in this. Imagine a Denisovan-related group moving across a high valley in air so thin that every breath has weight. The sky is a hard blue. Snow lies in shadow even when sunlight strikes the ridges. Animals move cautiously over the open ground. Smoke rises low from a sheltered fire. No monument marks their presence. No text records their route. Yet their bodies are engaged in one of the great experiments of human evolution, life at the edge of oxygen. Thousands of years later, their separate identity is gone, but one adaptation crosses the boundary of extinction. It passes into Homo sapiens. It survives not as memory, not as story, not as a name, but as an advantage in the blood. The cave in Siberia opened the door, but the high plateau widens the mystery. Denisovans were not merely hidden people in cold stone chambers. They were part of an ancient Asian world where human relatives adapted to extremes that still challenge us. Their story reminds us that the vanished humans were not failed versions of ourselves. In some places, they knew the world better than our ancestors did. They had already learned difficult landscapes. They had already paid the evolutionary cost of survival. And when Homo sapiens entered those worlds, the boundary between replacement and inheritance became blurred, because one humankind could disappear while helping another remain. The Denisovan story becomes possible because science learns to listen to what bones no longer say aloud. For most of the history of human origins research, the dead had to speak through shape. A skull could reveal a brow ridge, a jaw could reveal a chin or its absence, a femur could reveal posture and movement, a tooth could preserve growth and ancestry in enamel. Stone tools added another language, but it was often anonymous, because a sharp flake does not carry the maker's face. Archaeologists built careful arguments from these remains, comparing curves, ridges, thicknesses, measurements, layers, and landscapes. That work still matters. Without it, ancient humanity would have no body. But the arrival of ancient DNA changes the room. It does not simply add a new clue. It turns on a light behind the evidence and reveals that some of the most important human populations were almost invisible. Ancient DNA is fragile. It breaks after death into smaller and smaller pieces. Heat, moisture, soil chemistry, microbes, and time all work against it. In warm environments, it often disappears long before researchers arrive. In cold places, especially caves, permafrost, and protected sediments, it can survive in damaged fragments. Recovering it is slow, difficult, and vulnerable to contamination from modern handlers. The process requires clean laboratories and methods that distinguish ancient molecules from modern noise. This is why Denisova Cave becomes so important. The cold of the Altai does not preserve everything, but it preserves enough. A tiny bone can hold a genetic library reduced to tatters, and from those tatters a vanished population can step forward. At first, mitochondrial DNA plays a dramatic role. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited through the maternal line and exists in many copies inside cells, which makes it more likely to survive and be recovered from ancient remains. When the finger bone from Denisova Cave is tested, its mitochondrial genome looks deeply different from that of modern humans and Neanderthals. It suggests that the individual belongs to a lineage not previously recognized from fossils. But mitochondrial DNA is only one thread. It traces one line of inheritance, not the full ancestry of a person or population. Nuclear DNA carries a far broader picture, inherited from both parents and reshuffled across generations. When nuclear DNA is recovered, the Denisovan place in the family tree becomes clearer. They are a sister group to Neanderthals, more closely related to them than to modern humans, yet distinct enough to stand as their own branch. This is the revolution in miniature. A bone too small to give a face gives a genome. A genome gives relationships. Relationships redraw migrations, contacts, and separations. From that point onward, the human past can no longer be reconstructed only by what is large enough to see in a display case. It must also be read in sequences, in patterns of shared ancestry, in segments of DNA passed from vanished groups into living people. The result is not a simpler story. It is a more complicated and more honest one. Human evolution begins to look less like a line of replacement and more like a long record of populations diverging, meeting, mixing, and sometimes disappearing into one another. The DNA revolution also changes Neanderthals. Before ancient genomes, many debates about whether Neanderthals contributed to modern ancestry rested on bones, tools, and uncertain interpretation. Then genetic evidence shows that most people outside Africa carry some Neanderthal ancestry. The boundary between them and us softens. The same happens with Denisovans, but more strangely, because Denisovan ancestry appears unevenly across the world. Some groups carry little or none. Some populations in Asia and especially Oceania carry more. Tibetan high-altitude adaptation points to a Denisovan-related genetic contribution. Other Denisovan-like signals suggest more than one episode of interbreeding, perhaps with different Denisovan-related populations. Scholars still debate the exact number, timing, and locations of these encounters, but the broad message is clear: Homo sapiens did not expand through Eurasia alone. Perhaps the most haunting part of this new science is that DNA can reveal people without bodies. In some cases, genetic traces are recovered from sediment itself, where ancient humans and animals left microscopic biological material in cave floors. A site can preserve the presence of a human group even when no recognizable bone is found. This changes the meaning of emptiness. A layer that once seemed silent may contain molecular evidence of who passed through. A cave can become an archive not only of objects but of presence. The evidence remains incomplete, and sediment DNA requires careful interpretation because material can move through layers and context can be complex. Still, it opens the possibility that many vanished human histories may be hidden in places where the eye sees almost nothing. Ancient proteins add another tool. Proteins do not carry the full richness of DNA, but they can survive in conditions where DNA fails. The identification of Denisovan-related remains from the Tibetan plateau shows how protein evidence can connect a fossil to a lineage even when ancient DNA is absent or degraded. This matters especially in warmer regions, where DNA preservation is poor. Future discoveries may come as small molecular signatures that place mysterious fossils into the human family tree. Yet these tools also demand humility. DNA can feel definitive because it is mathematical, sequenced, compared, and measured. But interpretation still depends on models, assumptions, sampling, and the uneven survival of evidence. A genome from one cave does not represent every Denisovan who ever lived. A genetic segment in a present-day population may reflect an encounter that happened far from the place where Denisovan bones have been found. A population can be missing from the fossil record not because it was rare, but because its environment destroyed its remains. What survives in the record suggests patterns, but not every movement, face, language, or choice. No single explanation fully accounts for all the signals, and new evidence can still bend the map. There is also a strange emotional shift in discovering ancestry through DNA. A skull invites recognition through the face. A genome invites recognition through connection. It says not only that these people existed, but that they entered the ancestry of others. It says that extinction can be porous. Denisovans vanish as a separate population, but pieces of their inheritance remain in living bodies. Neanderthals disappear, yet their genetic traces remain in many people. The old categories of survivor and extinct become less absolute. Some human groups are gone in name, culture, body, and separate continuity, but not entirely gone from biology. This does not make DNA a replacement for archaeology. Genes do not tell us how a hearth sounded at night, how a tool was taught, what an ornament meant, or whether a group returned to a cave because of memory, weather, or animal migration. DNA gives kinship, ancestry, mixture, and adaptation. Archaeology gives place, behavior, material life, and time on the ground. Climate evidence gives the shifting world around them. Fossils give bodies. Each line of evidence is partial. Together they create the only picture available, still torn, still dim, but far richer than anything one method could provide alone. For Denisovans, the DNA revolution is almost an act of resurrection, though not in the fantasy sense. It does not bring them back. It does not restore their voices or complete their faces. It does something quieter and perhaps more profound. It proves that a nearly invisible people helped shape the ancestry of living humanity. It shows that the crowded human Earth was biological reality. Some of our deepest relatives were not discovered because they built monuments, wrote texts, or left abundant skeletons. They were discovered because a fragment of bone in a cold cave kept its molecular memory long enough for us to read it. The vanished do not always vanish outwardly. Sometimes they disappear from the landscape, from the caves, from the visible bones, from the memory of every living language, yet remain inside the bodies of people who never knew their names. This is one of the strangest discoveries in the Denisovan story. The evidence begins in ancient fragments, but it does not stay there. It travels into the present, into the genomes of living populations, where small inherited pieces of Denisovan ancestry continue to exist. A people without a surviving face leaves a trace in blood, immunity, oxygen use, metabolism, and the quiet architecture of inheritance. The cave gives them a name, but living people show that their story did not end at the cave mouth. Denisovan ancestry is not distributed evenly across the world. In most people it is absent or very small. In some populations of Asia, traces appear at low levels. In parts of Oceania, especially among Papuan and some indigenous Australian-related ancestries, Denisovan ancestry can be noticeably higher than in most other populations. This pattern is one of the great clues that Denisovans, or Denisovan-related groups, were spread far beyond the Siberian cave where they were first recognized. If the only Denisovans had lived in the Altai Mountains, the geography of their genetic legacy would be difficult to explain. The signal in living people points toward a larger and more complicated ancient world, one in which Homo sapiens met Denisovan-related populations somewhere along the long southern and eastern routes through Asia. The details remain debated. Geneticists compare genomes, measure shared segments, estimate when interbreeding occurred, and model how ancient ancestry moved through populations. But models are not time machines. They are careful attempts to infer a lost pattern from surviving data. Some evidence suggests that the Denisovan ancestry in present-day people may not come from just one encounter with one Denisovan population. Instead, there may have been multiple episodes of mixing with different Denisovan-related groups. This would make sense if Denisovans were spread across Asia in populations separated by distance, climate, and time. A northern group near the Altai, a highland group connected to Tibet, and southern or eastern groups closer to the routes into island Southeast Asia may have been related but not identical. The word Denisovan may be covering several deep human histories at once. In living genomes, this ancestry does not appear as a complete Denisovan identity. It appears as fragments. Segments of DNA are passed down, broken up by recombination across generations, reduced, preserved, lost, or amplified depending on chance and selection. Most of what once entered Homo sapiens populations may have disappeared over time. Some archaic variants may have been harmful in their new genetic background and were gradually removed. Others may have had little effect. A few may have helped in particular environments. This is how ancient interbreeding becomes evolution's raw material. It does not create a simple hybrid people frozen forever between two forms. It releases variation into populations, and then time, environment, and chance decide what remains. The high-altitude adaptation connected to EPAS-1 is the clearest and most famous Denisovan legacy, but it is not the only area of interest. Researchers have studied Denisovan-related DNA for possible roles in immune function, metabolism, fat storage, and responses to environment. The results are often complicated, and scholars still debate which variants were truly beneficial, which were neutral, and which are being overinterpreted. It is easy to turn every archaic gene into a dramatic survival gift, but biology is rarely that tidy. Some inherited segments may have mattered greatly in one place and not at all in another. Some may have helped ancient people resist local pathogens. Others may have had costs as well as benefits. The evidence remains incomplete, and careful science moves more slowly than the imagination wants. Still, even the cautious version is astonishing. A person living today in the highlands of Tibet may carry a genetic adaptation shaped by Denisovan-related ancestry. A person with roots in parts of Oceania may carry a larger Denisovan signal inherited from ancient encounters somewhere along the route their ancestors travelled. A person in East Asia may carry smaller traces, hints of old mixture spread through countless generations. These people are not Denisovans, they are modern humans. Fully Homo sapiens, but their ancestry, like the ancestry of most humans, is not sealed inside one pure line. It carries old meetings, it carries vanished neighbours, it carries reminders that the human family once had more voices. This also changes the meaning of disappearance. When a population vanishes from the fossil record, it is tempting to imagine a final campfire going cold, a last group fading into silence, a clean ending. Sometimes that may have happened. Small populations can disappear completely. But Denisovans complicate the picture. Some of their descendants may not have remained Denisovan in any separate sense. They may have become part of expanding Homo sapiens populations through repeated interbreeding and absorption. In this model, disappearance is not always replacement by strangers. It can also be merging. A group loses its separate identity, its language, its social continuity, and its recognizable body of tradition. But some of its ancestry continues in another people. Extinction, in human evolution, can be biological survival in a different form. There is a quiet human consequence in this. The past is often imagined as a sequence of winners and losers, as if species compete and one simply defeats the rest. But genomes suggest something subtler. The last surviving human species is not untouched by those who vanished. Homo sapiens carries Neanderthal ancestry. Some Homo sapiens carry Denisovan ancestry. Other unknown archaic traces may yet be recognized more clearly. We are alone now, but we are not unmixed. Our solitude is built from encounters. The last human voice includes echoes of other humans, not as memory, but as inheritance. The unevenness of Denisovan ancestry also reveals ancient geography in a way no map can fully show. Genes move with people, but not always with the original source population. A Denisovan segment could enter one Homo sapiens group in one region, then travel through intermarriage, migration, and population movement far from the place where the first encounter happened. By the time descendants reach island worlds or highland valleys, the original meeting may be thousands of years behind them. This makes the search for Denisovans difficult. The strongest genetic trace in living people does not necessarily point directly to the place where bones will be found. It points to a history of movement, mixing, and inheritance layered over a changing Ice Age landscape. For the people who carried these traces, there was no awareness of genetic legacy in the modern sense. Ancient mothers and fathers did not know they were preserving the ancestry of a disappearing human line. They knew kinship through faces, bodies, care, proximity, and shared life. The genetic consequences were invisible. A child born of contact between different human groups would have belonged to a living social world, not to a future scientific category. Over generations, descendants would simply be people among people. The Denisovan trace would become quieter, broken into smaller pieces, carried through time without story. And yet, thousands of generations later, science finds it again, not as a myth, not as a legend, not as a remembered ancestor in a named genealogy, but as a pattern in DNA. The living body becomes an archive older than writing. It holds evidence of meetings in landscapes now changed beyond recognition, perhaps on plains drowned by rising seas, in forests where bones decayed, on plateaus where cold preserved only fragments, or in valleys whose names are gone. What survives in the record suggests that Denisovans were not merely an extinct curiosity. They were participants in the making of later humanity. Their separate world disappeared, but their biology did not fall silent. So the story returns to the crowded human Earth, but now the crowd is partly inside us. The ancient fires are gone. The cave sediments lie under careful excavation. The jaw rests in scientific attention. The teeth are measured, sequenced, compared. But in living populations, tiny Denisovan inheritances continue to move through ordinary life. They pass through families, through breath, through adaptation, through bodies that belong entirely to the present yet carry pieces of a deep and vanished past. This is the Denisovan legacy at its most intimate, not a monument on the land, but a hidden signature in the people who came after them. A tool is never only a tool, it is a decision hardened into stone, bone, shell, wood, or fibre, and most of those materials do not survive long enough to testify. Stone remains because stone is stubborn. It lies in sediment after the hand is gone, after the fire is gone, after the language is gone, after the body itself has returned to the earth. This is why the ancient human record can sometimes feel colder and simpler than ancient life really was. A stone flake survives, but the cord that tied something together disappears. A hearth stain survives, but the words spoken near it vanish. A tooth survives, but the song, warning, lesson, gesture, or memory that once moved through the same mouth leaves no fossil. For Denisovans, this imbalance is especially severe. Their DNA is powerful, their physical remains are scarce, and their culture stands behind a wall of silence. At Denisova Cave, archaeologists have found a rich sequence of artifacts and occupation traces, stone tools, animal bones, hearth evidence, ornaments, worked materials, and layers that show human presence across long spans of time. The cave is not culturally empty. It is full of signs that ancient humans returned, worked, ate, warmed themselves, shaped objects, and perhaps marked identity or beauty in ways that went beyond immediate survival. But the central difficulty remains. Several kinds of humans used this cave or the surrounding region at different times. Neanderthals were there, Denisovans were there. Modern humans may also have been present in the wider landscape and perhaps in the cave sequence. So when a finely made object appears, the question is not only what it is, but whose world it belongs to. The evidence remains incomplete, and in a cave with such deep and mixed human history, certainty is hard-earned. This is where popular imagination often races ahead of the record. Denisova Cave has produced objects that seem almost too evocative to leave alone, including ornaments and the famous polished stone bracelet often associated in public discussion with Denisovans. The bracelet is beautiful, made from chloritolite, carefully worked and polished, with a drilled hole suggesting advanced technique. It has been described in ways that make it sound like a royal treasure from a lost civilization. But careful archaeology asks a slower question. Was it truly made by Denisovans? Was it made by modern humans? Did it move from one layer to another? does its age and context securely match the people we want to attach it to? Scholars still debate such associations, and the safest interpretation is not the dullest one. The grounded truth is already remarkable. The world around Denisova Cave included ancient humans capable of skill, planning, material selection, and possibly symbolic expression. The mystery is not whether someone there was clever. The mystery is who, exactly, made what. Stone tools offer a more durable but less personal record. In the Altai and across wider Eurasia, different tool traditions appear through time, reflecting changes in technique, raw material use, and possibly population movements. A prepared core, a blade, a scraper, a point, a flake struck with practiced force each carries evidence of knowledge. Tool-making requires more than hitting one rock against another. It requires selecting stone with the right fracture properties, understanding angles, controlling force, imagining the desired edge before it exists, and often teaching the method through demonstration. Even simple-looking artifacts may represent long traditions of learning, but stone tools do not always reveal species. Similar needs can produce similar solutions. Different human groups can use related technologies. One group can learn from another. A tool style can spread through contact without a population being replaced. No single explanation fully accounts for the patterns. And this is why culture cannot be read as easily as a label on a museum shelf. For Denisovans, the silence is not proof of poverty. It is proof of preservation's cruelty. If they used wooden spears, woven bags, bark containers, plant fibers, hide clothing, sleeping mats, cordage, pigments on skin, feathers, or spoken stories, most of it would vanish. If they shaped social rules, remembered dangerous places, named animals, recognized distant kin, or carried rituals of return and departure, those things would almost never fossilize. A cave floor can preserve ash. It cannot preserve the feeling of gathering around warmth after a hard day, unless one learns to read ash as a human trace. A stone point can preserve skill. It cannot preserve the hand on another shoulder, the quiet correction of a learner's grip, the shared attention of people watching weather gather over the valley. This matters because the absence of evidence has often been used too harshly against extinct humans. Older views tended to grant modern Homo sapiens imagination, symbol, and culture, while treating Neanderthals and other archaic humans as practical but limited. Over time, evidence has complicated that hierarchy. Neanderthals used pigments in some contexts, made ornaments in some places, controlled fire, hunted effectively, and adapted to varied environments. Their behavior was not identical to that of later modern humans, and scholars still debate the scale and meaning of symbolic evidence. But the old wall has weakened. Denisovans sit inside that same changing understanding. They may have had rich cultural lives, but the record is too thin to describe them confidently. The honest answer is not to deny them culture. It is to admit that culture has not survived in enough detail to let us see it clearly. One lesser-known part of the Denisovan cultural puzzle comes from sediment itself. Ancient DNA recovered from cave sediments can reveal the presence of human groups even when no bones are found in that layer. This means scientists can sometimes say that Denisovans, Neanderthals, or other humans were present at site during certain periods without having a body fragment in hand. But presence is not the same as behavior. Sediment DNA can say someone was there. It does not automatically tell us what they made, what they believed, how they organized their group, or whether a particular ornament belonged to them. This is a new kind of ghostliness a population can become visible as a molecular trace, while remaining culturally silent. The silence also extends to language. Denisovans were close relatives of Neanderthals and modern humans, and it is reasonable to infer that they had complex communication. The demands of their lives would have favoured teaching, coordination, memory, and social learning, movement across harsh landscapes, tool production, fire management, and group survival are difficult to imagine without rich communication. But the exact nature of Denisovan language is beyond present evidence. We do not know its sounds. We do not know whether it had the same range as modern speech. We do not know how gesture, vocalization, expression, and shared attention worked among them. What survives in the record suggests complexity, but the words themselves are gone beyond recovery. Even the idea of art must be handled carefully. Modern people often look for art because art feels like the clearest sign of an inner life. A painted wall, a carved figure, a bead, a pendant. These objects seem to bridge the gap between survival and meaning. But meaning does not always choose durable materials. Denisovans may have marked bodies rather than walls, arranged objects rather than carved them, told stories rather than painted them, or expressed belonging through practices that left no trace. Or perhaps their symbolic world was more limited than that of later Homo sapiens. The truth is not yet visible. The evidence remains incomplete, and uncertainty is better than invention. Still, one can stand at the edge of what is known and sense the human shape of it. A group returns to shelter because the cave matters. Stone is brought in, struck, reshaped, animals are processed, fire is tended, objects are made, used, lost, broken, discarded. Young members of the group learn by watching capable adults, safely folded into the routines of life. Nights pass, seasons turn. Some things are kept because they are useful, some perhaps because they are beautiful, rare, memorable, or socially meaningful. The cave slowly fills with traces no one intends as a message to the future. And that is the great silence of Denisovan culture. It is not an empty silence. It is a silence full of missing sound. Behind each tooth and tool is a vanished system of knowledge. Behind each fragment of DNA is a body that once moved with purpose through a known world. Behind each uncertain ornament is the possibility of thought reaching beyond immediate need. Science must not pretend to hear what cannot be heard, but it can recognize that the silence belongs to people, not shadows. Denisovans did not live as evidence. They lived as humans, and evidence is only what time failed to destroy. Encounters between humankinds rarely announce themselves in the earth. A meeting does not fossilize simply because it matters. Two groups may see one another across a valley, watch smoke from a distant fire, follow the same herd at different times, leave footprints in mud that later dries, cracks, and disappears. They may exchange nothing more than caution. They may avoid one another for generations. They may share a landscape without sharing a camp, or, in rare moments that leave a deeper biological mark, they may come close enough for ancestry to cross from one human line into another. The ancient world of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other relatives is therefore not a single scene of contact, but a long pattern of possible meetings spread across immense geography and time. To imagine these encounters properly, distance must be restored. The Ice Age world is large, and human populations are small. A valley may hold one group for a season, then none for years. A cave may be occupied by Denisovans in one period, Neanderthals in another, and perhaps modern humans later, with centuries or millennia lying quietly between them. Overlap in a region does not always mean face-to-face contact. Yet the genetic evidence proves that contact did happen in some places and at some times. The challenge is to understand what kind of contact, how often, and under what conditions. Scholars still debate the locations and timing of many encounters, because DNA can reveal mixture without preserving the moment of meeting. For Homo sapiens expanding beyond Africa, Eurasia is not vacant. Neanderthals know much of Western Eurasia. Denisovan-related groups likely occupy parts of Asia, from northern zones to high plateaus and perhaps farther south. Other human populations may live in island worlds or forested regions where preservation is poor. To our ancestors, these relatives would not appear as categories. They would appear as other people, perhaps unfamiliar in body shape, voice, tool style, scent, ornament, gesture, or movement. Perhaps close enough to be recognized as human in ways that mattered immediately. The boundary between strangeness and kinship would not have followed modern scientific names. Some encounters may have been distant and cautious. A group finds a recently used shelter, ash still dark in a hearth, bones split for marrow, flakes of stone left beside a wall. They know others have been there. They may choose to move on. A hunting route may be altered to avoid competition. A river crossing may become a place watched carefully because another group uses it. These are encounters without touch, but not without consequence. In a world of small populations, information about neighboring humans matters. The presence of another group changes decisions about food, movement, safety, and timing. What survives in the record suggests that ancient humans were highly attentive to landscape, and other humans were part of that landscape. Other encounters may have involved exchange. This is harder to prove, especially between different human kinds, but not impossible in principle. Materials can move across regions through trade, gift, scavenging, imitation, or the movement of people themselves. A technique can spread from one group to another without a population being replaced. A tool form can be copied because it works. A shelter location can become known because others used it first. The archaeological record is rarely clear enough to say that Denisovans learned a specific behavior from Neanderthals, or that Homo sapiens copied a specific practice from an archaic neighbour. But the possibility of cultural contact must remain open, especially in places where genetic contact is already proven. The most intimate evidence comes from genomes. Modern humans outside Africa carry Neanderthal ancestry. Some modern populations carry Denisovan ancestry. Denisova Cave preserves the remains of a person with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. These facts show that ancient human groups did not remain sealed apart. They mixed, at least occasionally. This does not require imagining frequent or easy union across all regions. Contact may have been rare, uneven, and shaped by local circumstances. A small group entering a new territory might be absorbed into another. Individuals may move between groups. Neighbouring bands may form temporary alliances or social ties, or a single encounter may leave descendants whose ancestry spreads far beyond the original place. The emotional scale of this is difficult to hold. In scientific language, interbreeding can sound clinical, like a line in a genetic model. But in lived reality, it means people formed relationships across difference. It means children were born into social worlds that had to make room for mixed ancestry long before anyone understood ancestry as DNA. It means the borders between human kinds were neither absolute nor meaningless. These children would not be symbols of evolution. They would be members of groups, carried, fed, protected, taught, and folded into daily routines. Their descendants, if they survived, could carry pieces of more than one human inheritance into the future. Encounters may also have involved competition, but competition need not be imagined only as dramatic confrontation. Often it is quieter. Two groups need the same seasonal animals. Two groups prefer the same shelter. Two groups gather the same raw material for tools. One population is larger, more connected, or more flexible in moving through changing environments. Another is smaller, more isolated, and less able to recover from poor seasons. The pressure may build without any single decisive event. No single explanation fully accounts for the relationships among ancient humans, and direct evidence for conflict between specific groups is limited. The safer view is that contact could include many possibilities: avoidance, curiosity, copying, mating, competition, and absorption. Climate controls much of this pattern. During colder phases, habitats contract or shift. During warmer phases, forests expand, animals move, corridors open and close. A group that once lived apart may suddenly find its range overlapping with another. The same mountain pass that blocks movement during one period may guide movement in another. Low sea levels expose coastal plains, while later seas drown them and erase campsites that might have held crucial evidence. These environmental changes do not simply push humans around like stones in water. Human groups respond with knowledge and choice, but the choices available to them are shaped by the planet's slow violence and generosity. Denisovans sit at the center of this web because they seem to connect worlds that are otherwise hard to join. In the Altai, they meet Neanderthals or Neanderthal-related people. Somewhere in Asia, they meet Homo sapiens. Through Denisovan-related ancestry, they connect to high-altitude adaptation in Tibet and to genetic traces in parts of Oceania. Their encounters were not one event, but a set of ancient crossings whose locations are still partly hidden. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the pattern is unmistakable. Denisovans were not isolated curiosities. They were participants in a continent-wide human drama. The other humankinds remind us that contact may have taken many forms beyond the better-known triad of sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. In island Southeast Asia, Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis show that small, isolated human populations could survive in worlds with difficult geography and unusual evolutionary pressures. Whether Homo sapiens ever met them directly remains uncertain in detail, and the timelines are debated in some cases, but the possibility gives the late human world an even stranger texture. Imagine entering an island landscape where another kind of human has already learned its forests, animals, and paths. The meeting, if it happened, would belong to the same larger theme our ancestors moved through worlds already inhabited by human others. By the time the record grows clearer, Homo sapiens is spreading more widely. Tools, symbolic objects, long-distance movement, and expanding populations begin to mark a new phase. But this expansion is not a simple wave washing over emptiness. It passes through territories of older human experience. In some places, the older populations vanish. In others, they are absorbed. In still others, they may already be gone before modern humans arrive. The ancient encounters remain uneven, local, and hard to reconstruct. But their legacy is written in the fact that the last human species carries ancestry from those it met. So the crowded human Earth becomes a world of thresholds, a valley edge, a cave mouth, a river crossing, a high pass, a coastline now beneath the sea. At each threshold, one human group may become aware of another. Some meetings leave no trace at all. Some leave stone tools whose makers cannot be named. Some leave children, and through them, genetic signals that survive longer than memory. the lost human world was not only a story of separate species disappearing one by one. It was a story of contact, uncertain and deeply human, where difference sometimes held, sometimes blurred, and sometimes passed quietly into the future. The disappearance of other humankinds is often imagined as a single dark event, as if one winter arrived, one battle occurred, one superior species advanced, and the rest of humanity simply stepped out of history. The truth is slower, stranger, and more difficult to hold. Neanderthals, Denisovans, island humans, and other archaic relatives did not vanish in the same place, at the same time, or necessarily for the same reason. Their endings were scattered across landscapes and millennia. Some may have declined before Homo sapiens arrived in their region. Some may have met modern humans and mixed with them. Some may have been reduced by climate instability, shrinking habitats, low numbers, disease, competition, or chance. Some may not have disappeared cleanly at all, but dissolved into the ancestry of larger populations. No single explanation fully accounts for the silence that followed them. Climate is the first great pressure because it shapes every other pressure. During the Ice Age, the world is not merely colder, it is unstable. Habitats expand, contract, and relocate. Grasslands become forests. Forests become steppe. Deserts widen. Lakes disappear. Coasts shift. And animal ranges move. A human group adapted to one pattern of landscape can find itself living in another within a few generations. For large, connected populations, change is dangerous but survivable. Some groups move, some exchange mates with neighbours, some borrow techniques, shift diets, or follow new routes. But for small, isolated human populations, environmental change can be unforgiving. If a valley no longer supports the animals people depend on, if fuel becomes scarce, if a familiar migration route breaks down, if neighbouring groups are too far away to provide partners or knowledge, decline can begin quietly. Small population size may be one of the most underestimated forces in human extinction. A group does not need to be defeated to disappear. It can simply become too small. When numbers are low, every bad season matters more. Every lost connection matters more. Genetic diversity declines. Social networks shrink. The ability to recover after hardship weakens. A population spread thinly across harsh country may survive for thousands of years, then vanish because several pressures arrive close together. This is not dramatic in the way legends prefer, but it is powerful. Extinction can happen through arithmetic as much as catastrophe. The evidence remains incomplete, but genetic studies of Neanderthals and Denisovans suggest that at least some archaic populations were relatively small and structured into separated groups. That kind of life can endure for a long time, yet remain vulnerable when the world changes. For Denisovans, this possibility is especially important. Their genetic legacy implies a wide range, but wide does not necessarily mean densely populated. A lineage can be spread across enormous regions in small pockets, separated by mountains, deserts, forests, and climate zones. One Denisovan-related group may live in the north, another on high plateaus, another farther south or east. They may be related across deep time, but not constantly connected. If some populations are isolated for too long, they become fragile. When Homo sapiens expands into Asia with larger networks and perhaps more flexible long-distance connections, Denisovan groups may not be overwhelmed in one dramatic wave. They may simply become fewer, more scattered, and more likely to be absorbed or lost. Competition with Homo sapiens is part of the story, but it must be treated carefully. It does not need to mean constant violence or deliberate extermination. Direct evidence for such sweeping conflict is limited, and the ancient world was too varied for one simple model. Competition can be quiet. If two human groups depend on the same animals, the same shelters, the same stone sources, the same seasonal routes, one may slowly gain an advantage. Homo sapiens may have had broader exchange networks, more flexible social ties, more rapid innovation in some contexts, or simply larger population numbers. These advantages would not make our ancestors magically superior in every setting. Neanderthals knew Europe intimately. Denisovans may have known parts of Asia better than any incoming sapiens group. But over long periods, even small differences in population growth, mobility, and social connection can alter the balance. There is also the possibility of absorption. This is where the word vanished becomes misleading. If a Denisovan group interbreeds with Homo sapiens over many generations, and if the sapiens population is larger, the Denisovan identity may fade while pieces of Denisovan ancestry continue. The people are not erased in the simple biological sense. They become part of another population. Their language, tools, territory, and social continuity may disappear, but their descendants live. This may have happened in different ways across different regions. Some Denisovan-related populations may have died out without descendants. Others may have been absorbed. Some may have left strong genetic traces, others only faint ones. Scholars still debate how often this occurred and where, because the genetic signals are scattered and ancient bodies are rare. Neanderthals offer a parallel. They disappear as a distinct population around the time Homo sapiens spreads widely through Europe and Western Asia. Yet many living people carry Neanderthal DNA. Their disappearance was not complete biological erasure. Climate instability, small numbers, competition, and interbreeding may all have played roles. It is likely that different Neanderthal groups experience different endings. Some regions may have seen direct overlap with Homo sapiens. Others may have seen local decline before contact became intense. The same kind of uneven pattern may apply to Denisovans, though their fossil record is far thinner. The great danger is turning a complex continental history into a single cause, because single causes are easier to tell. Island humans reveal another form of vulnerability. Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis lived in island worlds where isolation could preserve unusual traits, but also limit recovery from crisis. Islands can be refuges, but they can also be traps. A small population on an island may survive for immense periods if the environment remains favorable, yet become highly vulnerable to volcanic events, climate shifts, ecological change, or the arrival of new competitors. The evidence for their final disappearance remains debated, and it would be reckless to claim more certainty than the record allows. Still, their existence shows how human diversity could persist in pockets, hidden from the larger continental drama until one change too many ended the balance. Chance also deserves a place. Though it is rarely satisfying, humans prefer meaningful endings. We want causes with shape conquest, disaster, brilliance, failure. But in small populations, chance can be decisive. A few poor years, a broken connection between neighbouring groups, a decline in fertility, a disease moving through adults, a volcanic disruption, a route closed by ice, water, or desert. None of these alone needs to be universal. Together, in one local world, they can be enough. What survives in the record suggests patterns of vulnerability, but the exact last moments of most human lineages are lost beyond recovery. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that Homo sapiens did not survive because survival was guaranteed. Our species carried advantages, certainly flexible behaviour, expanding social networks, symbolic communication, technological variety, and eventually population size on a scale other humans may not have matched. But those advantages developed within particular histories. They were not a cosmic promise. There were moments when Homo sapiens populations also suffered, contracted, moved, failed, and adapted. We're here because many lines of ancestry endured through countless narrow passages, not because extinction belonged only to others. So the disappearance of the other humans is not one mystery with one key. It is a landscape of endings. In one place, climate closes a world. In another, a small population is absorbed into a larger one. In another, isolation becomes too deep. In another, Homo sapiens arrives not as a destroyer in a simple tale, but as a new pressure in an already stressed environment. The crowded human earth becomes quieter by degrees. Fires that once belonged to different kinds of humans are no longer relit by separate hands. The valleys remain, the caves remain, the wind continues, but the voices become fewer, until one human species is left to wonder why the silence feels so complete. The last Denisovan does not leave a clear footprint at the edge of history. There is no final skeleton placed neatly in a layer that says, "Here the lineage ends." There is no cave wall marked with a farewell, no abandoned village, no monument turned to dust. The disappearance is quieter than that. It happens somewhere in the gaps between bones, in the thinning of populations, in the merging of ancestry, in landscapes where warm soil destroys DNA before anyone can recover it. The Denisovans fade from direct evidence long before their genetic echoes fade from the living world. This is what makes their ending so difficult to imagine. They are both gone and not gone, extinct as a separate human population, yet present in small inherited fragments carried by some people today. To search for their last echoes, one must begin with the problem of visibility. Denisova Cave preserves Denisovans because the conditions are unusually favourable. Cold, sheltered sediments help ancient molecules survive. But if Denisovan-related groups lived across much of Asia, many of their remains would have been exposed to climates far less kind to preservation. In tropical forests, acidic soils and humidity break down bone quickly. On ancient coasts, rising seas after the Ice Age may have drowned camps, pathways, and burial places. In mountain regions, erosion can scatter evidence. In open landscapes, bones may never be buried in the right way. Absence in the archaeological record is therefore not the same as absence in the ancient world. It may simply mean that time has been more efficient than discovery. This matters because the genetic record suggests Denisovan-related ancestry entered Homo sapiens more than once, perhaps from different populations. If true, then there may not have been one last Denisovan population. There may have been many last Denisovan moments, scattered across Asia. A northern group may have disappeared in one period. A highland group may have persisted in another. A southern group may have been absorbed into expanding Homo sapiens populations, whose descendants carried pieces of Denisovan DNA toward island Southeast Asia and Oceania. Scholars still debate the timing and geography of these events, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the pattern already warns against a single dramatic ending. In the Altai, Denisovans appear in a deep sequence of occupation that also involves Neanderthals. Their presence is not a simple, continuous story from beginning to end. Ancient populations come and go as climates shift. Denisovans may use the cave in one period, Neanderthals in another, perhaps with occasional overlap or contact. Later, modern humans spread across wider Eurasian landscapes. The cave becomes an archive of repeated human return. but not a complete biography of any one group. By the time the world moves toward the later Ice Age and then toward the warmer Holocene, the separate Denisovan signal has vanished from direct fossil evidence. Yet whether this means the people themselves had already died out everywhere, or whether related populations survived elsewhere unrecognized, remains an open question. The Tibetan Plateau adds another kind of echo. If Denisovan-related humans lived in high-altitude Asia, and if some of their genetic adaptations entered the ancestors of modern Tibetans, then their disappearance cannot be understood only as failure. Something they carried worked. Something selected in their bodies became valuable to another human population. The same harsh landscape that may have kept Denisovan-related groups isolated also helped preserve one of their greatest legacies. The high plateau becomes both a place of possible Denisovan life and a place where Denisovan inheritance remains useful after Denisovans themselves are no longer visible. Farther south and east, the echo grows stronger but more difficult to locate. Denisovan ancestry in Papuan and some related Oceanian populations points toward ancient interbreeding, somewhere along the routes modern humans took through Asia towards Sahul, the Ice Age landmass that joined Australia and New Guinea. But the exact place of that meeting remains uncertain. It may have occurred on the mainland before those populations moved farther south. It may have occurred in island Southeast Asia, in landscapes partly submerged today. It may have involved a Denisovan-related group quite different from the one known in Siberia. No single explanation fully accounts for the distribution. The genes are real, but the geography behind them is still partly hidden beneath forest, sediment, and sea. This is one of the most haunting contradictions in human origins. The strongest Denisovan echoes in living people may come from places where Denisovan bones have not yet been securely found. The cave gave them a name, but their legacy points beyond the cave. It suggests a people whose true range was written less in fossils than in the bodies of those who came after. To follow them, science must look not only in Siberian chambers and plateau caves, but in difficult regions where preservation is poor and ancient coastlines are lost. Future evidence may come from a tooth in a tropical cave, a jaw in a museum collection, a protein signature in a fossil too damaged for DNA, or sediment from a site where no visible human bone remains. Denisovans may continue to appear from material that earlier generations of science would not have known how to read. The question of disappearance also has to include identity. What does it mean for Denisovans to disappear if a small Denisovan-related group joins a larger Homo sapiens population, and over generations their descendants are mostly sapiens in culture, language, appearance, and social continuity? Has the Denisovan lineage ended or changed form biologically? Some ancestry survives. Culturally, the separate Denisovan world may be gone. This is not just a technical distinction. It changes the emotional shape of extinction. A people can leave no independent descendants who call themselves by their old name, no separate communities, no recognizable traditions, yet still contribute to the bodies of future humans. Their ending is not a door closing cleanly. It is a river losing its name when it joins a larger current. There may also have been places where the ending was harsher. Some Denisovan populations may have died without being absorbed. Small groups in cold valleys, highlands, forests, or isolated basins could have declined until no one remained to carry their local knowledge, a route forgotten, a shelter unused, a tool tradition no longer taught. In such cases, extinction would be complete at the local level. But because the record is so thin, we cannot follow each loss. What survives in the record suggests both disappearance and inheritance, both silence and survival through mixture. That tension is the center of the Denisovan ending. Compared with Neanderthals, whose late sites and physical remains allow a more detailed debate about final populations, Denisovans remained frustratingly elusive. There is no broad map of last Denisovan caves, no series of regional cultural phases confidently tied to them, no complete skeleton showing the last anatomical form of the lineage. Their final history is reconstructed from scattered ancient remains, genetic models, and living ancestry. This makes them feel more ghost-like than other extinct humans, but perhaps also closer to the truth of many ancient populations. Most human worlds leave little behind. Denisovans are not unusually silent because their lives were empty. They are silent because the past is selective. And yet, there is a strange intimacy in their survival as fragments. A person today does not feel Denisovan ancestry as a memory. It does not appear as a dream of the Altai or the plateau or a drowned coast. It is simply part of the body's inheritance, mixed into the long chain of human reproduction. Some of it may do little, some of it may matter, some of it may once have helped in high air, cold stress, immune defense, or environments not yet fully understood. These fragments are not relics locked in a museum. They are living traces, copied in cells, passed through generations, quietly folded into the present. So the last Denisovan echo is not found in one place. It is found in a cave where a finger bone changed science. It is found in a jaw from a high plateau. It is found in genetic segments across Asia and Oceania. It is found in the unanswered questions attached to mysterious fossils. It is found in the possibility that entire human populations lived and vanished where no bone survives. The Denisovans disappear as a separate people, but they do not disappear as influence. Their story becomes one of the deepest reminders that extinction can be uneven, that absence can hide survival, and that the human past may still be carrying voices too faint for us to hear clearly. By the time their separate fires are gone, the world is moving toward the age of one surviving humankind. Homo sapiens spreads, adapts, multiplies, remembers, forgets, and eventually builds the long chain of cultures that will lead to villages, cities, writing, ships, empires, laboratories, and the patient sequencing of ancient DNA. But inside that success is an older inheritance. The last Denisovan does not stand outside us completely. Somewhere along the way, the boundary opened. The vanished entered the surviving, and because of that, the end of Denisovans is not only a silence in the caves, it is also a whisper still carried forward, hidden in the living. By the time the other human voices fade, Homo sapiens stands alone, but not untouched. That is the final paradox of the crowded human earth. We are the only surviving human species, the last branch still growing above the ground. Yet our ancestry is not a pure and isolated line. It carries traces of meetings older than history, older than farming, older than the first cities, older than every language now spoken. The last human species is also a living archive of vanished humans. Neanderthal fragments remain in many people whose ancestry lies outside Africa. Denisovan fragments remain in parts of Asia and Oceania, and perhaps in ways not yet fully understood. Other archaic signals may still wait inside genomes, unnamed, like shadows behind shadows. We're alone now, but our solitude is mixed with inheritance. This changes the emotional meaning of survival. It is easy to imagine Homo sapiens as the winner of a contest, the one species that defeated or outperformed all the rest. There may be some truth in the idea that our species had advantages: wider social networks, flexible communication, expanding symbolic culture, long-distance exchange, and the ability to adapt quickly to new environments. But the real story is not a clean victory march. Our ancestors survived through movement, contact, hardship, learning, and chance. They entered landscapes already known by others. They met human relatives who had adapted to Europe's cold valleys, Asia's mountain worlds, island forests, high plateaus, and environments that modern researchers are still trying to reconstruct. Homo sapiens did not inherit an empty planet. Our species inherited a world already shaped by human presence. The disappearance of the others left no single silence. It left many silences. Neanderthal fires no longer burn in European rock shelters. Denisovan groups no longer return as separate peoples to the Altai, the plateau, or whatever southern landscapes once held them. Homo floresiensis no longer moves through the island world of Flores. Homo luzonensis no longer leaves fragmentary traces in the Philippines. Homo naledi no longer complicates the African human landscape with its strange mixture of traits. Older human lines that lasted for hundreds of thousands, even millions, of years are gone. Their tools remain, their bones remain in rare cases, their genetic echoes remain in some of us, but their independent worlds have ended. What survives in the record suggests that this ending was not one catastrophe, but a long narrowing. That narrowing is difficult to imagine because modern humans have filled the earth so completely. Cities glow at night where Ice Age grasslands once stretched. Roads cross plains where mammoths moved. Aircraft pass above mountains where Denisovan-related people may once have breathed thin air with bodies adapted by generations of selection. Ships cross waters that cover ancient coastlines where human groups may have camped, met, and vanished without leaving a visible trace. The modern world makes our species seem inevitable, but deep time removes that comfort. For most of our story, the future was uncertain. Homo sapiens was one human among others, not the guaranteed heir of the planet. The evidence remains incomplete, and perhaps it always will. New fossils may change the map. Ancient DNA from sediments may reveal populations that bones have hidden. Proteins may identify mysterious jaws or teeth. Genomes may uncover archaic ancestry from groups not yet named. Scholars still debate how many kinds of humans existed at the same time, how sharply to divide species, and whether boundaries between population, subspecies, and species should be drawn. These debates matter, but they do not weaken the central truth. Humanity was once plural. The world once held many human answers to life's pressures, and only one answer remains as a separate species. Yet the vanished humans were not failures in any simple sense. Neanderthals endured for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo erectus lasted far longer than Homo sapiens has existed so far. Denisovans adapted to environments that later helped modern people survive. Island humans persisted in small worlds with strange evolutionary rules. These were not unfinished drafts waiting to be replaced. They were successful populations in their own times and places. Their disappearance tells us less about weakness than about the difficulty of lasting forever on a changing planet. No lineage is promised permanence, not theirs, not ours. The Denisovan story especially leaves a deep impression because it shows how much can be hidden. A whole human lineage can be nearly absent from the visible fossil record and still alter the ancestry of living people. A finger bone can open a continent-wide mystery. A tooth can suggest a body we cannot yet see. A jaw from a high plateau can turn a mountain landscape into part of a vanished human range. A gene can carry breath across extinction. If Denisovans had not been found in the right cave, under the right conditions, At the right moment in scientific history, they might still be mostly unknown. That thought should make every confident story about prehistory a little quieter. So Homo sapiens remains, but not as a species standing outside the lost world. We are part of its aftermath. Our bodies carry some of its crossings. Our science reads its fragments. Our imagination tries to return shape to people time has reduced to sediment, sequences, enamel, stone, and shadow. We look back from the bright, loud present and discover that the human past was not a narrow corridor. It was a crowded landscape of relatives, meetings, separations, and disappearances. The last surviving human species is not the whole story of humanity. It is the last page of a much older book, and many of the earlier pages are torn, stained, or missing. There is humility in that realization. The word human once had more than one living form. It had different bodies, different adaptations, different ranges, perhaps different voices, different gestures, different ways of knowing fire, stone, animal movement, cold, hunger, and night. Most of those forms are gone, but their disappearance did not make them meaningless. They shaped the world our ancestors entered. They shaped parts of our ancestry. They remind us that intelligence, endurance, and humanity itself have never belonged to one simple path. And when the story returns at last to the cave, to the wind, to the cold valley and the small fragment of bone, the scale becomes almost impossible. From a piece of a finger, science hears a lost people. From living DNA, it hears ancient contact. From silence, it reconstructs a crowded earth. The final image is not of Homo sapiens standing triumphantly over extinct rivals. It is quieter than that. It is one human species walking forward with the traces of others carried invisibly inside it, crossing a world that was never ours alone. The fires are low now. The cave mouth is dark, and beyond it the valley lies under a sky without names. Snow gathers in hollows. Wind moves through grass, stone, and trees, passing over places where many kinds of humans once lived without knowing they would become mysteries. They did not think of themselves as evidence. They did not live for museums, laboratories, or future questions. They lived for warmth, food, kin, shelter, memory, and the next safe morning. Time has taken almost everything from them. It has taken their voices, their faces, their paths through forests, their small habits near the fire, their ways of greeting, warning, teaching, resting, and watching the dark. It has taken the names they may have used for rivers, mountains, animals, and one another. What remains is fragile and scattered: a tooth, a jaw, a fragment of bone, ash in sediment, stone edges, silent caves, and the hidden grammar of DNA. From these pieces, we do not recover the whole world. We recover only enough to know that the whole world was there. Denisovans fade into that darkness most gently and most strangely. They are gone as a people, but not entirely gone from life. Somewhere in the bodies of living humans, some of their inheritance still moves quietly forward. It does not speak. It does not remember the cave. It does not carry a story in words. Yet it is a trace of contact, survival, and deep time, carried beyond the disappearance of the people who first held it. The human story, then, is not only about what survives, it is also about what nearly vanished before we learn to see it. It is about the fragility of evidence and the patience required to listen to fragments. It is about the long narrowing from many human worlds to one, and it is about the strange tenderness of knowing that even extinction may leave a whisper. The wind moves again over the old valley. The fire settles into embers. The last light touches the cave wall and fades. Somewhere beyond the reach of memory, many humans once shared the earth. Now only one remains awake beneath the stars, carrying, without knowing it, the shadows of the others.